There goes the savior of the world.
There's always been this weird obsession with transforming cartoons and anime into live action adaptations. Unsurprisingly, these adaptations are often incredibly disappointing. Let's not forget that Dragon Ball Evolution exists. Piccolo's costume still makes me laugh to this day. I mean, look at it. And we all know M. Night Shyamalan's Avatar was so terrible that no one was surprised that no sequels were greenlit. I can only imagine how terrible those sequels would have been. Honestly, after that, I thought it would have been the last time we ever saw Avatar in live action until Netflix announced its own adaptation of Avatar. First season of Netflix's Avatar Last Airbender, which had 8 episodes, debuted on February 22nd of 2024. Netflix announced the series in 2018, and the cartoon showrunners DiMartino and Canazzo initially played a significant role in the show's direction. This gave me a lot of hope that this adaptation would be perfect. However, 2 years later, they walked away from the adaptation over creative differences with Netflix. This definitely had me worried, to say the least. The 2005 cartoon was successful during its run on Nickelodeon. The idea of a war-torn world where specific people could bend one of the 4 classical elements and also include one person, the Avatar, who could bend all 4 elements became a hit among viewers. The cartoon landed high ratings and became a fan favorite with different generations. It even landed a sequel. Netflix already announced in March of 2024 that Avatar will receive a second and third season. Did it deserve a continuation or a cancellation? Let's discuss each episode and what we thought about this live action adaptation.
The first episode begins with Sozin revealing his desire to attack the Southern Air Temple, where Aang, Monk Gyatso, and the rest of the Airbenders reside. Aang learns from Monk Gyatso that he's the Avatar and, like his cartoon counterpart, fears the responsibilities and runs away with Appa. Soon after, the Fire Nation launches its assault on his home. We see the battle between the two nations, setting the tone for CGI battles between benders. And speaking of the CGI, I think it's solid throughout the series, but there are times when it could have been more polished. Anyway, the Fire Nation wipes out Monk Gyatso and the other airbenders. Aang and Appa fall into the ocean, but he goes into the Avatar state and freezes themselves in ice. 100 years later, Sokka and Katara discover Aang emerging from the ice, releasing a beam of light that Zuko sees in the distance. Aang learns what's been going on in the world during his absence and willingly gives himself up to Zuko. With help from Sokka and Katara and Appa, he escapes and together they head to the Southern Air Temple. After finding Gyatso's body, Aang briefly enters the Avatar state but quickly calms down, realizing his duty as the Avatar, and the episode ends here. So this first episode I believe is a strong start, and I want to mention the acting from everyone in this episode was pretty spot on, especially from Aang's actor. However, I believe that this episode may have been DiMartino and Konietzko's only direct involvement before their departure, as they are credited for the teleplay in the end credits, but the rest of the episodes only credit them as based on the animated series by. The changes made after this episode I feel delved away from how they envisioned the show to be, and not having enough control over the project is what made them leave. So without further ado, let's move on to the next episode.
In episode 2, Aang believes visiting Kyoshi Island will help him better control the Avatar state. The group heads there when they first come across the statue of Kyoshi and are confronted by the Kyoshi warriors, but they stop being hostile once they realize who Aang is. The village leader wants them to leave but is convinced by Suki to allow them to stay for 48 hours. During this time, Aang and Katara practice some waterbending and learn what they can about Kyoshi, while Sokka ends up training to be a Kyoshi warrior. A major change that I had a problem with was Sokka's lack of sexism. I'm not sure why they decided to remove this aspect of Sokka's character, as his learning that women can be just as effective in battle, if not more so, was an important part of this development in Avatar. Meanwhile, Zuko and Iroh travel to a port where Iroh believes they can gain some intel on the Avatar's whereabouts. It is here that we are introduced to Commander Zhao. Zhao learns from Zuko's crew about spotting the Avatar and deduces that he can be nearby on Kyoshi Island, so he heads there. Zuko follows Zhao, fearing he might catch the Avatar first. Aang enters the Kyoshi statue and is able to speak directly with Kyoshi. I thought this scene was done really well, as Kyoshi has always been shown to be straightforward with Aang and favors violence to solve problems, unlike Aang, who uses violence as a last resort. Dialogue between them was nicely done. When Zhao and his soldiers arrive at Kyoshi Island to search for the Avatar, the village retaliates and fighting quickly ensues. I love watching Kyoshi take over Aang's body to save her village, forcing Zhao and his soldiers to retreat. Even Zuko gets blasted by Kyoshi. The group eventually moves on from Kyoshi Island to continue their adventure. It concludes with Fire Lord Ozai reading a letter sent to him by Zhao informing him of the Avatar's return. I thought episode 2 was overall good, however it was disappointing that the Unagi was cut out. In the cartoon, Aang wrote a giant sea monster called the Unagi to save the village from the Fire Nation. I was looking forward to see how they would implement the Unagi in the live action, but seeing that it wasn't included was sort of a letdown.
While the first 2 episodes had some changes, they managed to remain somewhat faithful to the original show up until this point. However, it's this 3rd episode that everything changes drastically. The episode starts with some residents of the Fire Nation attempting to stage a coup and kill Fire Lord Ozai. We're introduced to Azula, who is working undercover and leads the residents directly into a trap where they're annihilated by Ozai. Regarding the casting of Azula, she doesn't look or act intimidating, and honestly, I wish they saved her appearance until much later into the story, like they did in the cartoon. Hopefully in later seasons her character aligns more with her cartoon counterpart, but so far it's disappointing. Later in the show, we're also introduced to Mei and Ty Lee. The actor for Ty Lee embodies her character perfectly, while Mei, I think, could have been casted better. We see Aang, Katara, and Sokka flying on Appa. Aang believes he spots another airbender in the distance heading to Omashu, so that's where they're headed next. With the help of a stranger, they're able to enter Omashu. The airbender that Aang thought he saw turns out to be Tio, and we also meet his father, Sai. In the cartoon, Tio and Sai lived in the abandoned northern air temples, but here they live in Omashu. In the cartoon, Tio's father was simply referred to as the Mechanist. They never gave him a name in the cartoon, which I thought was interesting. With Aang's arrival, Tio wants to stop the Fire Nation bombers that have been terrorizing Omashu, and so Aang and Tio set out to stop the bombers. Zhao receives word that an airbender was spotted in Omashu, and somehow Zuko convinces Zhao to let him and Iroh go alone into Omashu. This really felt out of character for Zhao. I would have expected him to order Zuko to stay put while he sends his own men, or goes after the Avatar himself. Katara ends up spying on Sai, who meets up with the Fire Nation spy. And do you remember that stranger that helped the group get into Omashu? Turns out to be Jet, and we're also introduced to the rest of the Freedom Fighters. Aang and Tio arrive at their destination and realize the Fire Nation weren't the bombers. It was the Freedom Fighters behind the explosions. The group reunites to realize Jet is the bad guy, but Katara refuses to accept this. She confronts Jet and he reveals his plan by replacing Sai's briefcase, and during his audience with the king, shoot it, which would kill everyone at the meeting, including the king, Tio, and Sai. Katara and Sokka manage to stop Jet's plan. Meanwhile, Zuko attacks Aang, but the fighting alerts the Earth Kingdom guards, and I'll say that the fighting here was actually pretty fun to watch. Iroh distracts the guards by firebending, allowing Zuko to escape, while Iroh and Aang are captured, concluding the episode. Initially, people might question why Jet and the Mechanist are in Omashu and say that it was an unnecessary change, but giving the episode another rewatch, I think it sort of works. Jet in particular, I think did the best here, and I was honestly hoping we would see more of him in this first season, but we didn't get that. Hopefully he has much more screen time in the later seasons.
We start with Aang and Iroh interacting in their cells, but Iroh is removed and taken to a labor camp as a prisoner of war, while Aang is removed to face the Earth King. Zuko is able to sneak into the palace disguised as an Earth Kingdom soldier and learns that Iroh has already been taken away. Faced with either going after his uncle to free or him capturing the Avatar, he decides that his uncle is much more important at the moment. He eventually catches up to his uncle and together defeats the Earth Kingdom soldiers that were escorting Iroh. There was this one scene where an Earth Kingdom soldier felt immense anger towards Iroh, and I thought it was portrayed much better than in the cartoon. He was getting ready to smash Iroh with a rock. Katara informs Sokka that Aang has been captured, and Sai tells him that the only way to sneak into the palace is through a secret tunnel, the same secret love tunnels that we're familiar with from season 2 of the cartoon. But Katara confronts Jet about his morals and compares him to the firebenders and leaves him in ice. Katara and Sokka head for the tunnels. As they head inside the tunnel, Katara and Sokka meet the traveling nomads singing the secret tunnel song. Despite the nomads' warnings, they go inside anyway. Honestly, the secret tunnel was a letdown since Aang wasn't here. We don't get any sweet Aang and Katara moments. So far, there's been no hints if Aang even has a crush on Katara or if Katara feels any kind of way towards Aang. Their relationship feels strictly platonic and only business, just saving the world. Katara and Sokka come across a badger mole that starts to chase them. Before it attacks them, it suddenly detects their love for each other and stops being hostile. I'm not really a fan, as I feel this doesn't make any sense. I mean, since they're blind, can they literally sense a heartbeat or something? I feel there needs to be a bit more clarification there. Badger moles end up leading them out of the tunnel. Aang finally comes face to face with Bumi, and for some reason, I don't know why they did a complete 180 on Bumi's character. Instead of him being happy to see Aang and providing wisdom, he's acting how I would expect Kiyoshi to talk to Aang, just being harsh and talking down to him. Aang and Bumi have their fight scene, but Bumi is angry that Katara and Sokka interfered and simply yells that Aang cheated. Again, I don't know why they chose Bumi to act this way, since in the cartoon, he was glad that Aang had friends that would accompany him, while here he hated that he had liabilities traveling with him. Ultimately, Aang changes Bumi's mind, and he thinks and acts just like his cartoon counterpart again. I didn't think they had to have Bumi treat Aang so harshly at first. We also got two nice flashbacks related to Zuko and Iroh. The first was during the funeral service of Iroh's dead son, Lutin. Iroh appreciated the respect that Zuko showed to Lutin in his attempt at comfort. In the second flashback, we see Zuko about to head off to sea to start his search for the Avatar, and Iroh joins him not as a babysitter to watch over Zuko, as a friend, which is how this episode ends. Overall, I think this was probably one of my least favorite episodes in the series since I didn't really like many of the changes made here. The best part of the episodes were the scenes involving Zuko and Iroh, but that's mainly it, at least in my opinion.
In episode 5, the group comes across a burnt down forest and learns that a nearby village sent people to bring back food, but they never returned. Aang senses that they were taken to the spirit world and is determined to bring them back. For some reason, Aang brings Katara and Sokka with him into the spirit world, which doesn't make much sense, but it happens anyway. They encounter an owl named Wan Shi Tong, who originally appeared in season 2 of the cartoon, residing in his library. Here, however, he's in the spirit world to warn Aang about his friends being in the spirit world and the dangers of revealing the truth to them, and they then get split up by another spirit named Heibai. Sokka meets a talking white fox in the spirit world, which will be much important later on. This episode clearly tries to combine the spirit world and the swamp episode from the cartoon. In the swamp episode, spiritual branches cause the group to hallucinate. In this adaptation, Katara and Sokka's visions are controlled by an evil spirit named Ko. For instance, Katara sees her mom and witnesses her demise. Sokka sees his dad. These scenes are meant to make them feel despair so that Ko can, feed on their soul. The scene where Aang meets Ko face to face was, in my opinion, really well done and visually striking. Ko holds Katara and Sokka hostage, forcing Aang to run away as he's unsure how to save them. Meanwhile, Zuko receives a tip about the Avatar's whereabouts, so he and Iroh visit a town full of criminals, hoping to find a clue but with no luck. It's here we're introduced to June, who by the way was perfectly cast. Iroh decides that using June's Shershu, Nyla, with its strong sense of smell, is their best bet at finding the Avatar. I'm not one to admit this, but this episode made me tear up a little bit. I never felt this way before from a live adaptation. Aang reunites with Gyatso in the spirit world, and Gyatso tells him that he doesn't blame him for not being there to defend the Air Nomads. Aang promises that once he helps his friend, he will return to talk more with him. It was really sentimental seeing Aang and Gyatso hug. Gyatso tells Aang that Avatar Roku once defeated Ko, and the episode ends with Aang heading to Avatar Roku's shrine in Fire Nation, hoping to communicate with Roku on how he can get his friends back. This episode was solid, and I felt set up the next episode perfectly.
I'm going to say up front that this episode is my favorite in the entire Netflix season. This episode was largely based on the cartoon episode when Katara and Sokka were sick and Aang needed to find frozen frogs to make them feel better. The episode starts with Aang visiting Avatar Roku's shrine. The sages attack Aang, but one sage, just like in the cartoon, assists Aang and takes him directly to Roku's shrine. Aang is then able to talk to Roku to find a way to save his friends from Ko. Conversation between the two was nice to see, and Roku reveals that Ko would be willing to trade Aang's friends in return for his mother, the Mother of Faces, in the form of a small statue located in the shrine. Unfortunately, we don't get to see Roku's dragon Fang, which was a bit disappointing. Aang leaves the shrine to head back to save his friends, but June arrives and paralyzes him with her Shershu and Nyla. June collects a bounty from Iroh and Zuko once she hands Aang over to them. There is a slight flirtatious banter from June with Iroh, which I found to be a little bit cringe. She calls him cute and stuff. While Zuko and Iroh are transporting Aang, they're ambushed by Zhao and his soldiers, who then take Aang as their prisoner with the intention of turning him over to the Fire Lord. The scene is pretty spot on from the show. We see the Blue Spirit for the first time, and he breaks Aang out of prison. The action scenes in this episode were exciting and well done. It was nice seeing them work together. We later see the true identity of the Blue Spirit as Zuko once an arrow is shot at him, knocking him out. Aang decides not to leave Zuko behind and hides from the soldiers in a shed. Zuko and Aang have more dialogue in the show than in the cartoon here, which I'm not against. In fact, it shows that Zuko and Aang share similar interests. However, that is short-lived once Aang tells Zuko to show more compassion, since his father told him that compassion was a weakness, and he burned his face because of that. Aang knocks him out after Zuko attempts to burn him and places him in a boat, sending him away. One thing that I have to give Netflix brownie points for is that they expand on Zuko's backstory. In the cartoon, the crew that Zuko was traveling with wasn't given any reason as to why they were traveling with him. They were just kind of there, but it wasn't a big deal. But here, an actual reason is given. Zuko attended a war meeting with his father and war generals. The strategy was decided to sacrifice a group of new recruits called the 41st Division to gain the upper hand in the war. Zuko knew this was wrong, stood up for them, and called the plan terrible. Ozai saw this as a sign of disrespect and for Zuko to an Agni Kai match with him. After the Agni Kai, as further punishment, Ozai tells Zuko that the 41st Division will be the new crew he will travel with to search for the Avatar. Zuko saved his crewmen from death and his face was burned for doing so. This leads to the crewmen showing him more respect and honor after initially feeling that Zuko was disrespectful and lacked loyalty. The scene is a little emotional since he's walking past the crew as they bow down to him. It shows that Zuko has the potential to be a well-rounded, respected leader, but he hides, no pun intended, behind a mask. Once Aang hands Ko the statue, Katara, Sokka, and the missing villagers are freed. Aang returns to where he met Gyatso, but he's gone. The scene is kind of sad since he was hoping to continue talking with him, but it's not as depressing once he realizes that Gyatso finally decided to move on to the next stage of enlightenment or the afterlife. It's no surprise that this episode is the most well done throughout the Netflix series, and I hope that in future seasons we get more episodes that are just as polished as this one and can further enrich the world better than the cartoon at times.
Episode 7 starts with Zuko and Iroh, but they're told by a crew member that Zuko is to be arrested for treason. I guess they found out he was the Blue Spirit, so Iroh devises a plan to send Zuko on a small boat, but it's too late once the boat explodes. Iroh assumes that Ozai was behind the explosions and teams up with Zhao to take over the Northern Water Tribe. In the cartoon, pirates blew their ship up and Zuko was alone on it, but here I guess Zhao figured Zuko would use a small boat to escape and put blasting jelly on it. They later show Zuko surviving the explosion and they figure that Zhao was behind the explosion. Iroh explains to him Zhao's plan regarding the Northern Water Tribe. So Aang and the rest of the group arrive at the Northern Water Tribe and everyone kind of goes their own way. Katara learns how to use her water abilities to heal. Sokka is hanging out with Princess Yue and Aang is trying to connect with Avatar Kuro. We see Aang and Kuro talking to each other and just like how Kyoshi, Roku, and even Bumi keep telling Aang over and over that he needs to try and save the world on his own, with the recurring message that those he chooses to have a close relationship with will only be a liability. Katara finds out women aren't allowed to fight and gets upset about this, so she goes to Master Paku and tells him his ways of thinking are essentially stupid. They get into a one-on-one battle and it's nice to see Katara earning respect for standing up to him. Sokka is spending time with Princess Yue, but he is skeptical since she seems so familiar to him. This Princess Yue can bend water, which I felt should have been used in the cartoon more, since she is literally the embodiment of the moon, which waterbenders heavily depend on. He confesses to Sokka she can travel in and out of the spirit world, and it's portrayed as a white fox when she crosses over, the same one we saw in episode 5. Thought this was a bit of an odd change. In the cartoon, Princess Yue was forced into an arranged marriage to a soldier named Han. I remember in the cartoon he came off as arrogant, but in the show, they actually made him likable, and he and Sokka kind of created a mutual respect for one another, but it's revealed Sokka begins to pursue her more once he finds out she is single. Apparently in this version they were also in an arranged marriage, but Yue was actually able to cut it off completely. I guess they wanted her to have more freedom than in the cartoon. They also show Azula fighting prisoners that are earthbenders, but when it comes to the writing, I don't get why Ozai is putting her through so much training and constantly trying to get her to prove herself. The Azula from the cartoon wouldn't need to prove herself as she is already a superior firebender. By the end of this episode, the Fire Nation arrive at the Northern Water Tribe to begin their assault, and it's finally time to talk about the final episode.
The episode starts with the group defeating a few Fire Nation ships, thinking they have saved the day. However, their victory is short-lived once they realize there are hundreds more. We see Zuko and Iroh with Zuko ready to capture the Avatar. They share an emotional moment before Zuko journeys on his own. Iroh continues to act as if he doesn't know Zhao is behind the explosion. He is later told by Admiral Zhao about his plan to conquer the Moon Spirit. Zhao learned from the fire sages that the moon spirits make a physical appearance once a year. We also see a war balloon for the first time, which is annoying because it is used solely to allow Iroh and Zhao to reach the Northern Water Oasis. In the show, the firebenders rode on Komodo-like dragon creatures during the invasion, highlighting the exclusion of key animals and creatures from the cartoon. In this version, I guess the previous avatars can speak to Aang at a moment's notice if something is wrong. And Avatar Kuruk warns Aang that Zhao has his weapon, which may be used to cause damage in the spirit world. Katara confronts Pakku, insisting that the women need to fight alongside the men. Pakku still acts the same way, but his sexism isn't as notable as in the cartoon. He finally lets them in as all the women show up ready to fight. We see Momo risking his life by pushing a little girl out of the way when rubble almost collapses on top of her. But Momo ends up getting crushed himself. This Momo in the show is more selfless than in the cartoon. Princess Yue leads Sokka and Momo to the northern water oasis where they place Momo in the water, which heals him. Iroh and Admiral Zhao finally make it to the northern water oasis, but they are completely dumbfounded on where the moon spirit is. Katara and Aang are trying to get to the oasis when Zuko interferes. We see Zuko and Katara battle it out while Aang keeps on heading to the oasis. Zhao kills the moon spirit fish, which causes everything to turn black and white, and the waterbenders can't bend anymore. The moon is gone, and the Fire Nation now has the upper hand. I always found it chilling when Aang goes into the Avatar state in the cartoon, and I found it equally as chilling here as well. We see Aang give himself to the ocean fish spirit and turns into the giant waterfish titan that begins to fight against the Fire Nation. Zuko confronts Zhao, and he's shocked that Zuko survived the boat explosion. While they're fighting, Zhao's comments about Zuko's father and his sister Azula are triggering, and he also reveals he has been working with Azula all along. When Zuko's back is turned, Zhao attempts a finishing blow, but Iroh stops him, depicting his demise. Princess Yue decides to sacrifice herself to restore the moon. She freezes Sokka's feet to the floor so he doesn't stop her from restoring balance to the world. Katara begs Aang to return to them, which kind of reminds me of Katara from the cartoon. She was always there to comfort Aang when he went to the Avatar state and was somehow able to get him to return to his senses, which she manages to do here. By the end, we see the destruction caused by the battle. Many lives are lost, including Han. It was never said if Han survived in the cartoon. It was kind of left up to our interpretation. Pakku and Katara share a sweet moment where he compliments her abilities as a waterbender and hands her special water from the northern oasis. Ozai learns that the Fire Nation fails to take control over the Northern Water Tribe and that the Avatar is still out there, alive. But it turns out that the true target was Omashu and the rest of the Earth Kingdom. The season ultimately ends with Azula leading an army to capture Bumi and conquering Omashu, and it is explicitly said that Sozin's comment will be showing up soon. So the final episode ends, and I'm finally realizing Aang has not shown to waterbend at all this season, which was the whole point of this first season, especially in the cartoon. For me, this was the biggest and most disappointing change they made that deviated too far from the original.
So overall, I think this is an okay introduction for someone who may have never seen the cartoon version and wants some type of introduction to the world of Avatar. I feel bad for those whose first exposure was M. Night Shyamalan's version.
My name is Aang, and I'm the Avatar.
The casting was spot on for most of the characters, while for others, I was definitely questioning how they managed to even land their roles. I'm not really a fan of the large majority of changes made by Netflix. My only real concern moving forward with this series is simply how long the filming is taking and the actors aging. This first season started filming in November 2021 and didn't finish until June 2022. There are already reports that filming of season 2 will start sometime in September 2024 and possibly wrap up in March 2025. So we're not getting season 2 until at least 2026. They've already addressed that Sozin's comet won't arrive in a year's time, so there's no real sense of urgency, and they can stretch out the timeline to account for Aang's actor aging, which I'm personally not a fan of. But I guess we'll see what teenage Aang will be like in future seasons. I still highly recommend the original cartoon, as I think the story was expertly told better compared to Netflix, but I'm curious to see where they go from here.
Make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Bye!